Cycling has always been about winning. Recently, the hegemony of Team Sky and lately Jumbo-Visma has turned out that having a strong team won't necessarily make you win. However, it will help you massively. But having a strong team comes at a cost, a financial one. Today's podcast is all about that topic, as Joe and I discuss the possibility of introducing a salary cap in today's cycling.
Yes, hello and welcome back to the Ascent Cycling Podcast. And as Guillaume has mentioned in the intro, we will be discussing the possibility of introducing a salary cap to the world of cycling. And for those of you that aren't quite sure exactly what that means and what a salary cap entails, essentially it's limiting the financial power and the spending of teams to try and perhaps equalize the field a little bit, so we don't have one or two teams that can sign every single rider because they have 5 times more money than every other team. That is essentially the concept of a salary cap. So today we're going to be trying to analyze what would happen if we introduced a salary cap in cycling.
Joe has put it brilliantly. For those who follow maybe American sports, the salary cap is a concept you most likely are familiar with, as it is present in the NBA for sure. I believe in the NFL as well. But yeah, as Joe said, it would be having a limit on the amount of money a team can spend on salaries to try and even the field a bit.
So, a few riders have commented on this subject in the past, and notably one that I have found is Alberto Contador. In 2017, when he was finishing his career at Trek Segafredo, he was in favour of introducing a salary cap. He says, I think there should be a salary cap. You have to decide what the amount should be. For example, 15 million euros on rider salaries, because if budgets start to go through the roof, we're going to find it difficult to attract sponsors at all. But all in all, he was in favour of introducing a salary cap. Now, we have to consider that at the time, he was losing the Vuelta to Chris Froome and Team Sky, which may have, of course, swerved his opinions slightly. But there's a mix in the peloton. I think Froome himself has said, you know, where do we draw the line? Of course, we could introduce a salary cap, but at the end of the day, we're all humans, we're all eating the same foods, fueling ourselves for the stages, and is it fair really to limit a team's spending if they have that power available to them? What do you think on that, Guillaume?
I feel like having a limit, maybe not necessarily a hard limit, but having a limit would be somewhat important because I've got the budgets of some of the teams on this year's Tour de France. We're going to take like 2 teams from the World Tour. We're going to take EF and we're going to take Ineos Grenadiers. On paper, both teams are strong. They are strong World Tour teams. Sure, Ineos is by far better than EF, but EF did a good season, finishing on the podium with Ducati on the Vuelta, getting a few stages here and there, doing well with the likes of Dan Martinez, Michael Woods. They still have the likes of Rigoberto Urán. They're a good team. There's one big difference between those two teams. EF's budget for the 2020 season is 10 million euros. Ineos is 46. That's 4.5 times the budget of EF. And that leads to having an Ineos team on the Tour de France with the likes of Bernal, the likes of Carapaz, the Kwiatkowskis. There's so many riders, and it leads to having an armada which puts cycling not as interesting as it could have been. You mentioned Alberto Contador, and Contador was always one of those riders that always attacked because he didn't have the strongest of teams alongside him. And I feel like if there is one day a salary cap or a limit on what people can spend, or if the money is distributed maybe a bit better between teams, then I think it could genuinely increase entertainment in cycling, because I've talked plenty of times on the Tour de France that I didn't like how Jumbo was riding because it's even more boring than what Ineos did, and for 8 years we were bored by Ineos. But just having 5 riders basically being a lead-out train to their leader on the Queen stage of a Grand Tour, it's not something people want to watch, and it loses the interest in the sport. I feel like the salary cap could put interest once again on the scene.
Interesting. It's very interesting because you mentioned Jumbo Visma, and we saw Ineos riding a lot on the front throughout the year. They are the team with the biggest budget in cycling, that is without a doubt. Jumbo-Visma don't have the same budget as Ineos, yet they were still able to rise in a similar way to how we've seen Ineos rise in the past. So, taking that into account, is this budget salary cap, if it was introduced, is that actually going to prevent teams riding how we've seen Ineos with Skytrain and Jumbo-Visma this year? Is it genuinely for sure going to prevent that? Because if that is the main goal of introducing the salary cap, I'm not certain introducing the salary cap will have that effect on cycling. So it's a very difficult one to get right, that's for sure.
I agree, and I do get your point. I think it's quite tough to talk about this year as a whole cycling wise, because it's been a very odd season, obviously with the pandemic. But like you've mentioned Jumbo-Visma and their train. Jumbo-Visma appeared on the Grand Tour scene 2-3 years ago with Kruijswijk, well actually a bit more, like 4 years ago potentially with Kruijswijk, then Roglic, and then they signed Dumoulin. Dumoulin was their big signing this year. Their budget went from 9 million to 20 from 2019 to 2020, so that they doubled their budget, which is somewhat important. Sure, they're still 26 millions off the Grenadiers, but I mean, Ineos are in a league of their own budget-wise. The team that Jumbo-Visma brought on the Tour de France was Roglic, Dumoulin, Van Aert, Sepkus. There might have been a Hessink in there. I don't think George Bennett was there. But if you take someone like Sepkus, I do not know what his contract is, but I'm pretty much convinced that comes the end of his contract, he's going to want a bigger one. I'm going to guess that Primož Roglic might ask for a bigger contract as well. Wout van Aert most likely will ask for a bigger one. And if all of your riders start asking for more money, we come back to the initial question, at what point do you draw the line? Because Jumbo-Visma can't extend their budget forever. So they'll have to potentially lose a few riders. Therefore, having a team maybe a bit weaker. And if you've got a weaker team, you've got less chances of making a massive train.
I can see your point, because you are definitely having an impact on the strength of riders you can sign. One team I think is very interesting to look at in this discussion is the Quickstep, because I think most people would consider them to be the best classics team in cycling, and they have been for a very long time now. But they certainly don't have the biggest budget. They have a fair budget, but it's fairly standard, I would say, in World Tour. So Quickstep aren't able to pay their riders like Ineos can and like other teams can, yet they're able to keep Alaphilippe. They're able to attract a Remco Evenepoel on a long-term contract as well. So perhaps Quickstep, I feel, are showing other teams how you can operate at a slightly lower budget, but still really compete and dominate in many types of races.
Yeah, I feel like Deceuninck has done well. I also think Deceuninck, more than the financial aspect, Deceuninck knows how to win. And if they're going to sign someone, he's going to be good with them, no matter what. Like, take Sam Bennett. He's an absolute beast for Deceuninck. However, take someone like Elia Viviane, beast for Deceuninck, moved to Cofidis, less of a beast. I think there's a winning pedigree that attracts a few riders. They also have a very young squad, and they get a lot of riders from their reserve team, if I could call it like that. But the likes, I think Joao Almeida comes from, was it Hagen Berman? Or like, I think, no, Hagen, yeah. Remy Cavagna comes from their reserve. Alaphilippe comes from their reserve. Remco Evenepoel doesn't come from anyone's reserve, but technically, I mean, he is from Deceuninck. They build the riders, and then they might say like, all right, we're gonna teach you how to like win. I mean, it's very easy, simply put, to teach someone how to win. But they, in hindsight, they give them the help they need so that they can solidify themselves as riders for Deceuninck when they actually become pro. And compared to someone like Ineos every year they want to like increase their team by getting better riders. Like, they already had a packed team. They signed Richard Carapaz, who had won a Grand Tour. The year after that, which is this year, they've decided to sign Richie Port. They've signed Yates. They're signing triple A level riders, and you have to pay them. If you're Deceuninck and you sign Evenepoel, I don't know the contract. I don't think Evenepoel is paid as much as a Richard Carapaz.
I think there's some aspect. Deceuninck are a winning team. They have that philosophy really in the team, and they know how to win, like you say, and that's all it takes for many riders. If they have that ability to win and be in a winning team, money and that slight extra paycheck, if you're able to get it at a team like Ineos, maybe isn't the decisive factor for them. And also probably being a Belgian team, I think a lot of Belgian riders are more favoured to signing for Quickstep than a team like Ineos as well, which perhaps have more of a focus on the Grand Tours, whereas a lot of the Belgian riders who do sign for Quickstep and are successful in the classics really want a team to be focused on those types of races, which I think is also a factor.
No, of course, the financial, the national aspect, definitely comes into play, and also the specialty aspect. I don't think Theo Guggenhardt wouldn't go to De Koninck for his first team because De Koninck isn't known as a Grand Tour squad. The same way that I don't know, like a young Yves Lampard wouldn't have gone to Ineos thinking that it could be his breakthrough because it's not a team focused, and you have to go towards the team that's specialized in what you are specialized. So there's De Koninck specialized to the classic. Maybe that's why their budget is slightly less than a team like Ineos, because you get less money, or you're less likely to get money from classics than you are from Grand Tours. The bonuses given if you win the Tour de France, I believe it's 500k. I don't think it's the same if you win the Ronde de Paris-Roubaix or any other classic. So I think the budget is set accordingly to the specialty of a team. But one other aspect that comes into play when we talk about a budget of a team, and I'd like to get your point on that, is that the teams are based around a sponsor. And nowadays in cycling, you've got 3 teams basically sponsored by a nation. That's UAE, Bahrain, and Israel. We've seen Israel making huge moves for next season, signing the likes of Chris Froome. I'm guessing his contract must be somewhat huge because it's still Chris Froome. You do have Bahrain McLaren, who've lost McLaren as a sponsor, but still managed to not fold, and UAE, which are the second biggest team budget-wise in the World Tour. Do you think those kind of teams would be keen on seeing a salary cap being introduced, knowing that they basically have unlimited funds?
I can't imagine so. I really can't. The same goes for Ineos. I think Ineos and those 3 teams you've mentioned are probably the 4 teams most out of favour as introducing any kind of salary cap, because naturally it's going to prevent them from being as competitive as they're potentially able to with the current rule set. So it's only natural for them to think that way, I guess. And for me, most of the other teams will probably be on the other side of the fence, because they want the equal chance. And I think it's only natural for all of these guys to want the best for themselves. And you can see both points of view, because if Ineos and these teams like UAE have that massive budget, is it truly fair to prevent them from using it to be as competitive as they can be? Because you could say, okay, they have a bigger budget. Is it fair for the other teams who have a smaller budget? But in the same sense, is it fair to inhibit the other team's spending when they have that power? So it's a very difficult question, I think.
It is a tough question. It is a very tough question. I think at the end of the day, what matters most is for cycling to still be interesting. I talked about it briefly at the beginning, but if you're going to have a race and you know before the race even begins that you're going to have this team will ride, at this point said person will will accelerate for his leader, and you can call out the entire race even before it begins, I think that's where people should start to look and be like, all right, maybe we should change something, because UAE as we said on unlimited budget, but I don't see. I mean, sure they can spend millions and millions and millions and millions, but it would make the sport very boring in my opinion, and then the races would potentially lose sponsors. So everything revolves around the money aspect. But another question regarding the likes of UAE, Bahrain, and Israel mainly, not really Ineos, but what is your opinion on having teams funded by a nation and not a sponsor such like, I don't know, Sunweb or Lotto Soudal?
I've got no issue with it personally. I feel if they want to invest in cycling and give riders opportunities to grow and get a good paycheck, I've got no issue with it personally. I think there's a lack of money in cycling compared to some other sports, such as the NBA, which we mentioned earlier, and plenty of other sports due to various reasons, really. So I welcome it. I don't have too many issues with it. What's your opinion?
I don't either. I don't either, as long as it doesn't become completely huge numbers. Like UAE is second with 30 millions. Um, Again, with the current climate, it's quite tough to talk about like cycling and its future because we don't really know where it's headed. There's plenty of teams folding. I mean, NTT found a new sponsor, but they're going to lose division. CCC, who are the third highest team budget-wise this year, are going to fold. We talked about Bahrain losing their secondary sponsor in McLaren. I think a lot of teams, when they enter cycling, know that they're entering the sport at a loss. I don't know many teams in cycling that genuinely make a profit from what they spend. Um, but as long as the money like from those funded teams doesn't become huge, I don't have an issue with it. It's quite similar actually to, I mean, we talked about NBA. If you talk about football, let's take the Premier League for instance. Um, I think every team in the Premier League is owned by a huge consensus or a group of people that have money or shareholders, I guess. And you've got at the top the likes of Man City, and at the very bottom you got the likes of Burnley. If let's say I don't know Burnley beats Man City, then it's a huge upset because it's the small one beats the big one. In cycling today, we're still allowed to do so. Well, we're still able to see something like this happening. We can see, as I said, EF beating the big dogs on the Vuelta, for example, when Hugh Carthy beat everyone at the Angliru, which was great. But I feel like if the big teams keep on spending and the small teams have the same budget or maybe like increase it by 2 or 3% over the years, we'll be less likely to see those kinds of upsets, and we might not see someone like Joe Almeida or Jay Hindley doing well on a Grand Tour because I mean every team will have like three or four. Or every team, no, every big team or every big budget team will have 3 or 4 guys able to win the race, and that would just remove any kind of flavor to cycling.
It's interesting because to me, having those underdogs and the teams to beat with all the spending power, it's somewhat interesting to me because when you do see that upset happen, it's great to see. But I do think one point that we haven't touched on yet, and one shareholder really in this whole discussion is, or are the riders themselves. And one point on that is, do we want to suppress rider salaries artificially and prevent them from earning how much they can for being a professional cyclist? And doing that could somewhat be detrimental to the sport, which, as I mentioned earlier, doesn't have a great deal of money in the sport as a whole currently, and most likely won't in the future either. So preventing riders from earning their maximum in the sport artificially for no other reason than a artificial salary cap, essentially, I think that has to be considered as well. And really, for me, that's one of the reasons that I'm not certain that introducing a salary cap right now is the right thing to do.
I see it, and that's why I don't think that necessarily a hard salary cap could be the choice. You could have a modulable one with like a maximum budget, let's say 50 million, or actually, let's say 50 million is the max budget. But a team like Ineos, which earns much more money, could, I don't know, there could be some rules implemented. I think I read something maybe a couple of years ago on Reddit. I can't remember where. I mean, I think it's Reddit, but it probably like was 2 3 years ago. Someone had suggested that if Ineos was to sign up for some riders from like teams that develop riders, I mean, for example, Androni, they are very good at forming future climbers, the likes of Bernal, I think Ivan Sousa, Kevin Rivera, the Costa Rican guy. They are always a team that forms young riders, and the idea was that if, let's say, Bernal joins Sky or Ineos from Androni, a percentage of Bernal's wage would actually go to Androni because it would help the team keep on forming riders because that's what they do and that's what they're good at. And if they lose the financial power they have, then they can't keep on forming riders, and it's a detriment to the big teams. I mean, in the NBA it's a bit different because there's a lot of money in the NBA and everyone has the same salary cap. But let's say everyone in cycling has 30 million. Every team, every sponsor has 30 million as a set budget. It would be so much more interesting because you could see, I don't know, let's say Carapaz. Carapaz has the opportunity to join Ineos for a salary of, let's say, 6.5 million. Those are completely random numbers, right? But you've got a team like NTT. Well, I mean, no, let's not take NTT because they folded. Let's take Trek. Trek are able to give him 7 million. You've got the dilemma of either going for the money or for the competitive aspect. And that's why I love, because in cycling right now, well, if Ineos slaps 6.5 million on the team, there's not many teams that can actually compete with that. And if every team had the same set budget, it would be so much better. You could have moves every year from like big riders to another team, and it wouldn't necessarily always be like the good riders from small teams going to like be a teammate or an important rider to a very, very big team.
The point on developing young riders is another crucial one for me, because if we think about another sport in addition to the NBA, for example, football or soccer, as some people may call it, cycling's different in the sense that there are no transfer fees. It's really the end of contract is when riders are signed. 95+% of the time that is the case. You rarely see buyouts of contracts. So because of that, you're not truly rewarded for developing riders. And something I think that definitely needs to be looked at in cycling and could be done with some form of salary cap, and some rules that are introduced around that. I think teams should be rewarded much more for developing riders, and I think that's pretty crucial, because currently big teams, World Tour teams, don't really have any. They don't gain anything from having many young riders in the team because they can leave easily. So they're not really encouraged to give young riders opportunities, like you see in other sports.
Oh, 100%, 100%. And you mentioned soccer. I'm gonna go back on basketball for a second, but imagine, right? Imagine if every team had a set budget and you could see, like you've said that there's no transfer fees in cycling, unlike there is in soccer or football. In basketball, you don't exactly have transfer fees. You have trades. It would have been absolutely huge. Like, let's say, come back to the Carapaz. I don't know why I keep focusing on Carapaz. I've got nothing against the lad, but let's say Carapaz goes from Ineos to Movistar. No, sorry, from Movistar to Ineos, and in exchange, Movistar gets Castroviejo, I don't know, Pavel Sivakov, and let's slap, I don't know, like Brandon Smith Rivera, and like maybe Ineos gets or pays Movistar a bit to like make the balance. It would be incredible. It would be so much better from like a financial aspect, because there wouldn't be any loss of money. Because right now Movistar lost their leader, they didn't gain any money from it. Therefore, they can't replace him, and they become just not as good as they used to, and they can't do anything about it because they are not receiving any kind of income from that transfer. And I feel like that's where the big issue is. You've said it brilliantly. Like, there's no transfer fees, so there's no point. A team will not gain anything if they leave a rider. I don't know. It doesn't make sense to me that a team that loses something should at least get something back. That's how I see it. And even if, let's come back to, right, Movistar loses Carapaz, he had like a 6 million wage. Well, they are now able to spend 6 million on someone else. But are they attractive enough because they've lost everyone in their team? Maybe not. And therefore, they can maybe spend more money on a rider that would have spent less. But because the money aspect is there, he's more likely to join Movistar than, I don't know, Bora or Sunweb. And there's so many things to touch on that subject, because cycling in its current form, I feel economically is not viable. Every team enters at a loss. Teams are folding. There's some potential scams trying to go on. I think Mitchelton Scott was like technically in one of them earlier this year with Manuela Fondacion. I haven't figured out everything yet on that subject, but it's just, it can be a very shady place knowing that the money is so important, and if a team is dire to get some, they're gonna go to extreme length trying to stay in the sport. Yeah, I feel like something needs to change in cycling today.
The trading system you mentioned is definitely very intriguing to me. I personally am very interested in NBA and other American sports too. So the trade system may sound very alien, I feel, to a lot of cycling fans, but to me, I think it would be very, very interesting to see how that would play out. I think one thing we have to consider is the difference between a soft and a hard salary cap, which I think you touched on earlier. So the hard salary cap really is a firm limit. You cannot spend over, for example, 30 million, like you said earlier. Whereas a soft salary cap, you still have that limit of 30 million, but you are able to spend more than that, but you pay a tax on that. So for every $1 million or £1 million you spend over the salary cap, you're charged an extra million or an extra 2 million. That's how a soft salary cap would work. And what's your opinion on the soft versus a hard salary cap, Guillaume?
I'd be leaning a bit more towards the soft one, especially if those extra millions in tax could be potentially given to teams that don't have the actual budget. Like, let's say the salary cap is 30. Ineos enters the season with a budget of 40. They have to pay an extra 20 million of salary cap, or of luxury tax technically, and those 20 millions could be given to teams like I don't know, Trek, EF, which may have 25 million of budget, and that could make up the gap to 30, and it could even the sport. I think it's something that could be great. And you've touched on the trades. For those who don't know how the trade system work, it's somewhat easy. A team loses a rider for 6 million to let's take again Ineos and Movistar. Movistar loses Carapaz for 6 million to Ineos. The trade, to make it work, Ineos would have to make an offer whose value is also 6 million. It's equivalent to what they're gaining. It's a very simple system. It would be just incredible because there would be no loss. Sure, there would be a sports loss because you're probably if you're sending someone for 6 million and you're getting 4 riders back, for example, for that same value, you're most likely going to miss out on the talent and the strength that your leader has. But you're getting 4 new guys that you could potentially use to get someone bigger if you trade them again. And I would be extremely curious to see how that system would work. I don't think it would be extremely easy to implement. I don't think every team would be willing to do so. We've talked about UAE, Israel, Bahrain, and Ineos as their teams with basically unlimited fundings. I don't think they'd be necessarily willing to do so. But should it ever happen, should we ever see a soft salary cap, should we ever see some a trading system being implemented in cycling, it would be great.
I'm fully with you. I think a soft salary cap would be great to see in cycling. I'm not sure a trading system would be fully realistic in the near future, maybe further down the line. But what that would also do, having a trading system in place, would really encourage teams to develop riders. And if you develop a rider and show how good he can be, maybe you'll have the bigger World Tour teams looking to trade for him and give you back something in the form of other riders or even cash perhaps that you could also have in a trading system too. So that's one way that you could definitely encourage teams to develop riders, which as we've mentioned isn't really a thing in cycling at the moment.
I'm trying to think of many teams that uses young riders, like young prospects at a World Tour level that aren't proven. So I'm not counting Bernal, for example, for Ineos, or Theo Gegenhardt, because he did prove a few things. But I can think of obviously De Koninck, who are a very good team for young riders. Potentially Sunweb, I guess, could be classified as one. That's basically all that comes to my head, right? That's all that comes off the top of my head. And if every team were to develop young riders, because they are, at the end of the day, the future of the sport, there needs to be something done for young riders, because finding a spot in World Tour is already tough enough for them. Finding a spot where you can actually show your strength and show your capacities without being limited as a role of a teammate or of a domestique, it's extremely hard, especially in World Tour.
So Guillaume, you're placed in charge of the UCI tomorrow. What changes do you implement going into the 2021 season? Tell me exactly how you'd go about it. If you'd introduce a salary cap, what type it would be, and how you'd see that playing out.
I'd have a salary cap. Ideally, if every team was to be willing to do so, I'd have a soft salary cap limited at we'll say 25 million because there's only 2 teams above 20 million now in World Tour. I'd have a salary cap at 25 million. Every team that spends more than 25 million has to pay an extra million to each team that cannot make up the budget to 25. It would technically have every team at 25, maybe a few teams at 22, 24, but I feel maybe sponsors at that point could try and make up for that money, even in today's climate. I'm saying that it's an ideal where there's no pandemic, everyone can like potentially make the cut to 25 million. I wouldn't have a trade system quite now. I think it's more of a fantasy from me. It's mainly because we're in the NBA free agency right now, and I'm completely mad at it. But I mean, I think it would be a smart move to have trades, but it would be extremely hard to implement, especially right now. But yeah, I would definitely have a salary cap, a soft one, because it could make cycling just more interesting. You would have the small teams beat the big one, although technically on paper, I mean, Ineos would still be the big team in everyone's head, or like Jumbo or UAE compared to, I don't know, Arkea Samsic, for example. And yeah, I'd definitely have a salary cap with a tax on it to try and help the smaller teams make that budget. And also, I'd have a percentage on the wage of riders from formation teams, I guess, that go back to that team so that they can keep on doing their work to try and make cycling progress, such as an Androni, as I've mentioned, or like an Axens, Hagen, Bearman, or I don't know, even an Uno Eggs, which is a development team. Yeah, I would fund them to help them continue because right now it's a bit tough for teams like that.
Yeah, sure. Personally, I would also introduce a soft salary cap. One thing I'm definitely against is artificially suppressing rider salaries, and that soft salary cap aspect really fixes that, in my opinion, because teams can still and have the ability to pay riders what they wish. They're just penalised for it over a certain level. One thing I do disagree with you on is that it should be a 25 million kind of salary cap going in from next year. If these numbers are correct, so let's assume they are, Ineos are paying 46 million currently in their salaries. I personally wouldn't say it's fair to to impose a salary cap with a cap lower than what they're currently spending. I know they're massively above many of the other teams currently. To me, they've done that under the current rules. So should they be penalised for that going into next season and have to get rid of a load of riders? To me, that doesn't seem completely fair. So I would perhaps go in at 50 million or slightly above what Ineos are currently spending, which does allow a lot of growth within cycling. Hopefully, the financial aspects of cycling will grow and there'll be more money in cycling, enabling teams to spend more, riders to earn more money too. And so I think we should set a fairly high limit on salary. The other point is, what do you do with the luxury tax money? Say teams do go over the salary cap, and for example, Ineos went over, they pay a certain amount, they pay $20 million of luxury tax over the year. I think a good way to split that would be to give it to the teams developing the under 23 riders. As you mentioned, you could give a specific amount for each rider in each team under 23. I think that would be a fair way to do it and would equalize the fields as well as really rewarding teams for developing riders too.
Okay, I agree. I mean, I agree with most of the things you said. I do realize that the 25 cap is a bit harsh, especially like if it starts next season. But I mean, I think you said 50, right? I don't think a team like from the World Tour like EF can make the bridge from 10 million to 50. Because even if the limit is 50, if no teams can increase their budget, then the salary cap doesn't really change anything. So what I mean, I do agree with the fact that it's not exactly fair for Ineos because they've followed the rules and they just have more money than the others. But in that case, maybe have a salary cap that decreases from like 45 or 50 this year, and by 2025 the cap would be at 30. I think that could be like a decreasing cap. It allows every team to make their budget for 5 years' time to try and reach 30 million. By that time, Ineos can clear 16 million, I believe so. And I think everyone could be happy. I mean, Obviously, the 25 million cap for like next year is a harsh move. I do realize it now. But I feel like you can't ask team to, well, you can't say that the limit is 50, even if teams today struggle to reach 15.
I do fully see that point, which is why it's so difficult to get this right. If a salary cap isn't introduced, there is 100% going to be a portion of teams, a portion of riders that aren't happy with the decision. So that's why this is going to be a difficult move to make, and really why I can't really see it happening in reality in cycling as good as I think it could be potentially. I can't see it happening because there are going to be large portions of the peloton not happy with the way it's implemented.
I think at the end of the day, it's more of a fantasy. Sadly, because I do think that there are more benefits than there is downsides with implementing a salary cap. But there would be too many factors to take into consideration. Also, what we haven't mentioned in the NBA, but there's no team that folds. The franchise stay, or if it doesn't stay, it gets relegated to like another place. But in team, it's quite common to see team folding, and it would need to have a team that replaces them with already a set budget, and that's not done at all. As we said, cycling is a very tough place for money. As I've mentioned plenty of times, you enter the sport as a loss or at a loss, sorry. So I feel like the financial situation won't change, at least not now. Maybe, I don't know, in a couple of years, maybe in a decade, if things genuinely be stuck in the current situation, maybe we'll have a change. I'm all for it, but I would be quite interested to hear you guys' opinion. What do you guys think? Should cycling have a salary cap? If yes, what kind of salary cap? And if not, why? If there's people actually against it, I'd actually know why. That would be something, because we haven't touched on upon why there should not be one. So yeah, I'm quite curious to hear that.
Yeah, guys, definitely let us know what you think in the comments. Let us know on Twitter as well. We're available on Twitter too. All the links will be in the description, in the show notes as well. Guillaume, any final words?
Can we actually have interesting cycling and no just two trains in every single mountain stage?
Let's hope so.